This is part 2 of the Wholecloth Patterns Logan Bag Sew Along. Today we're going to sew the lining of our bag and we'll attach it to the body that we sewed in the part 1 video, and we'll attach the drawstring. If you're just starting out making your Logan bag, you're going to want to start with the part 1 video. I'll link to it and the Logan bag sewing pattern in the notes below the video. Now let's get started. I have the lining and the pocket bag cut out of the fabric, but the fabric is still pinned to the pattern piece. So now I'm going to transfer this rectangle that marks where the zipper opening is onto the fabric. And to do that, I'm going to use this tracing paper and a tracing wheel along with a straight edge. The tracing paper is just a piece of paper that has a chalky film on one side and the other side is just paper. So I'm going to put the chalky side up against the side of the fabric that I want to mark and then trace the pattern markings with the wheel. For the lining, I'm just going to make the marking on the right side. And I usually trace a little bit past the corners. I just think it makes it easier to see how things line up when you're putting the two pieces together. Here you can see where I've traced the outline of my rectangle. I ended up using 2 different colors so that it would show up on the light part of the fabric and the dark part of the print. I'm going to repeat this step with the pocket bag, but for the pocket bag, I'm going to transfer the markings to both sides of the fabric. You'll see when I line the two up together, I just think it makes a little bit easier. You can see where you're sewing on one side and the markings help you see where to line the rectangles up on the other side. To mark both sides at the same time, I have the pattern piece, then the tracing paper, then the fabric, and then the tracing paper again on the back. I like to confirm that it's transferred fully before I unpin the pattern piece. And here you can see the rectangle that I've transferred on both sides. Now with right sides together, I'm going to align the rectangle on the pocket bag with the rectangle on the fabric, and I'm going to pin around the opening. Next, I'm going to use this rectangular guideline to sew these 2 pieces of fabric together. I'm going to stitch around the rectangle, being careful to pivot at each corner. I usually like to start and stop stitching somewhere along one of the long edges, so I have room to backstitch without worrying about the precision at the corner. Next, I'm going to cut the opening. First, I'll cut a slit down the middle of the rectangle parallel to the long sides, and I'm going to stop about 1/2 inch from each short end. Here's the slit I just made. Next, I'm going to make a V at each end of the rectangle, connecting the slit to each corner. I want to be sure to cut to the corner as close as I can, but not cut through the stitching. Now I'm going to turn the pocket bag through the opening I just made in the fabric. Here you can see the rectangle that we just made. I'm going to press this to make a nice neat rectangle that's crisp at the corners. Now I'm ready to install my zipper. I'm going to turn the lining so that the right side is facing up, and I'm going to position my zipper inside this rectangle and then pin it in place. Here's my zipper positioned inside the rectangular opening. I usually open the zipper pull a little bit so I can be sure that the zipper tape is evenly spaced on this end of the zipper. Next, we're going to top stitch around this rectangle about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the opening. This is what holds the zipper in place, so it's important to be precise. I want to be sure to pivot neatly at each corner. And again, I usually start and stop somewhere in the middle of the rectangle so I have room to backstitch. My zipper is installed. Now I'm ready to sew closed the pocket. I have the lining positioned so that the wrong side of the lining is facing up and I can see my pocket bag. I'm going to fold the pocket bag in half so that the bottom short edge aligns with the top short edge. And then I'm going to pin these two pieces of fabric together, not pinning the lining. Now I'm going to sew the pocket bag closed along the top, and I'm going to fold the lining out of the way so that I'm only sewing the top of the pocket bag. Now I'm going to sew closed the two sides of the pocket using basically the same technique. I'm going to pin along the open side of the pocket and then fold the lining out of the way so that I can sew down the side of the pocket without sewing the lining. Here is my finished lining with the pocket, and now I'm ready to install my facing. I've already fused medium weight interfacing to the back of my facing just to give it some extra durability where I'm going to attach the eyelets later. And I'm going to align the long unnotched edge with the upper edge of my lining piece. I'm going to pin it and then sew. Here's my attached facing. Ultimately, I'm going to press the facing and the seam allowance away from the lining. I'm going to grade the facing portion of the seam allowance to be a little bit shorter than the lining portion. Now I'm ready to press my facing and my seam allowance away from the lining, and then I'm going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. I'm ready to join my lining to make the bucket shape. I'm going to align these two short edges and pin. I want to leave about a 6-inch opening in the middle of my lining so that I have a space to turn the bag right side out later. So I'm going to pin a portion here and a portion here, and when I sew, I'm going to leave a gap in the middle. Here's my lining with the top and the bottom of the seam sewn and the space I've left in the middle. You really just need a hole large enough to pull the base of the main part of the bag through after we attach the lining to the bag. I'm going to press open the full length of this seam, including the part that I didn't sew. Now I'm going to attach the base to the lining. And I'm going to do that in a similar way as we did with the main body fabric, except this is going to be a lot easier to sew because the fabric is so thin and we don't have the piping. So I'm going to align the back notch with the notch on my lining piece, and I'm going to align the front notch with this seam that we just sewed, because when we install the lining in the bag, this pocket will be at the back of the bag and the seam will be at the front. I'm going to pin at the 2 notches first, and then I kind of use those as base points so that I can ease the curve of the circle piece into the straight line of the lining piece, and I'm going to pin as I go. Next, I'll sew around this circle. here is the finished lining with the base attached, and now I'm ready to attach the lining to the body of the bag. To attach the lining to the body of the bag, I'm going to start with the lining right side out and with the bag wrong side out. And then I'm going to put the lining inside the bag so that right sides are together. I'm going to align the back notches on the lining, that's the one above the pocket, with the back seam of the bag. And I'm going to align the front seam of the lining with the front notch of the bag. Next, I'm going to align all the edges and pin around the open edge of the bag, and then I'll sew. I'm going to grade this top seam by about half so that it will be out of the way when we add our eyelets. And I'm just going to make one of the sides of the seam allowance to be just a little bit shorter than the other. Here's my graded seam allowance, and you can see that I've trimmed the quilted fabric a little bit shorter than the lining fabric. So then when the bag is turned right side out, it's a more gradual transition from the bulky seam to the lining. Now I'm ready to turn the bag right side out. And I'm gonna reach through the hole that I left in my lining and pull the base of the bag through this opening. Now that my bag's turned right side out, I can sew closed the opening that I left to turn the bag. And I just align the folds so that it's all in line with the part of the seam that we have sewn. And I'm gonna pin across the opening. And then I'm gonna sew as close as I possibly can to the edge of the fabric just across where the opening is. I've sewn closed that hole we left in the lining. Now I'm going to push the lining down into the bag. I'm using my fingers to push the seam to the top edge of the bag, and I'm going to roll that seam ever so slightly toward the inside of the bag so that you only see the exterior fabric from the outside of the bag. I'm going to press that and then top stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the open edge of the bag. At this point, all the sewing is finished for this bag. The only steps we have left are installing the eyelets and attaching the strap. Here you can see the dot where we marked the eyelet before I sewed the back seam of the bag. The location from right to left is still correct, but I want to verify the top to bottom location because I want it to be centered on the facing on the inside of the bag. And sometimes just margin of error of sewing the seams and rolling this seam a little bit toward the inside, these dots end up in the wrong place. So for the mini bag, I want it to be 1/2 inch from the top edge. So I'm going to measure that now and reposition the dots if I need to. I verified the location of my eyelets, and now I'm ready to install them. Use the manufacturer's instructions for whatever brand of eyelets you decide to use, or you can follow my step-by-step instructions in the video called How to Install Eyelets, where I'll demonstrate how to install the eyelets that I use for these Logan bags. The eyelets are installed, and now I'm ready to attach the drawstring. There's a diagram in the pattern instructions that shows you how the drawstring is supposed to go through the bag. I usually start with the cord loop and I leave a shortish end on one side because that's where I like the knot to be. Otherwise, I'm just going to sew the drawstring through the eyelets. I've finished threading the drawstring through all of the eyelets, and I've come to the back of the bag. And this long part of the drawstring where it goes from the eyelets to the cord loop is what makes up the straps of the bag. So at this point, I kind of want to adjust how much of the drawstring I have here at the back to give me enough room for wearing the bag as a backpack. And at this point, you can tie any kind of knot to secure the drawstring. My favorite knot to use is the Fisherman's knot because it's adjustable. And of course, I have a video tutorial for that I'll link to in the notes below the video. But put simply, you're basically tying a knot with one end of the string around the string itself, and then you can move that knot to adjust the length of the strap. So that's what I'm going to do for this bag. And then I just trim the ends just past where I've tied the knot. I've adjusted my straps and tied the knot in my drawstring. Now my Logan bag is finished and ready to go. Thanks for following along with me today. I would love to see what you've made. You can share your project by using the Wholecloth Logan Bag hashtag on Instagram, and be sure to click subscribe for more videos from the Wholecloth Patterns sewing channel.